Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a truly complex and often quite sensitive topic. We're looking at the multifaceted nature of support for Israel, particularly, from the United States and also within Christian communities. We've unpacked a really diverse stack of sources for this one. They range from geopolitical analyses, theological discussions, and even some pretty heated internal U.S. political debates.
Absolutely. And our mission for this deep dive is, well, it's pretty clear. We want to distill the key arguments, provide some crucial context, and really explore the different perspectives on why and how Israel gets support, or, why that support is maybe being reevaluated more recently. Our goal here is just to convey the ideas that are in the source material, helping you understand the different angles of play without us taking any sides on the content itself.
Okay, let's start by unpacking a central and, frankly, incredibly poignant part of this whole discussion. That's the status of Palestine. One of our sources really highlights a fundamental issue here. Palestine is, well, it's simply not acknowledged as a state by many, and this lack of acknowledgement is seen as a core barrier to peace, a real sticking point.
Yeah, and what's particularly striking in some of the sources is the perspective on Israeli control. We're talking over 60 years. This particular source details a profound lack of rights for Palestinians living under this control. Things like basically zero freedom of movement, no freedom to trade with the outside world, no voting rights, and critically, no right to due process.
Wow. So how do these big picture issues actually play out in daily life? What does that mean on the ground?
Well, the sources paint a really stark picture. It sounds like a system of legal and physical segregation. It's hard to even imagine.
With that,
Think about this example from one source. In the West Bank, if an Israeli settler and a Palestinian have some kind of dispute, the Israeli goes to a civil trial, normal process. The Palestinian, though, faces a military trial.
a military trial,
Yes, with a stated 99% conviction rate. That's if they even get that far.
99%.
It highlights this reality of two completely different legal systems, two realities, really, operating side by side. It points to a deep, deep power imbalance.
So this source then connects these conditions to resistance.
It does. It brings up a critical point, suggesting that when people face conditions like these, essentially forever, violent resistance can become almost inevitable. And crucially, the source claims that even nonviolent attempts at resistance are often met with violence.
Which just feeds into a cycle, right?
Exactly. This perspective really frames the human cost in this relentless cycle of conflict.
Okay, let's shift gears now. Let's look at a really significant driver of support for Israel, particularly from the U.S. Christian beliefs. One of our sources dives deep into what it calls the traditional view, often taught in Sunday schools, apparently. And this view suggests there's a strong biblical mandate to support Israel, built on four main pillars.
That's right. Four key pillars, according to this source. The first one centers on a foundational promise. It mostly refers back to the Abrahamic covenant, specifically a verse in Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who treat you with contempt. So for many people holding this view, this isn't just history. It's seen as a direct biblical requirement. Support Israel. Get blessings. Don't and risk, well, curses.
Okay, so what does support actually look like in practice, according to this perspective?
It can mean a lot of things. Politically defending Israel's right to the land, for instance, backing their military decisions, helping fund their military, even down to voting specifically for political leaders who are strongly pro-Israel.
Right.
And this pillar, promise, it can also lead to a more extreme interpretation, unequivocal allegiance.
Unequivocal, meaning?
Meaning, basically, no questioning, no criticism of the Israeli government, no challenging their actions. The source suggests that for some, even showing empathy towards Palestinians is risky, could get you labeled an anti-Semite or put you under that curse. So from this viewpoint, supporting Israel isn't just politics. It's a profound spiritual duty.
Okay, that's the first pillar, promise. What's the second?
The second pillar is prayer. This draws from Psalm 122.6, pray for peace in Jerusalem. It's seen as a command for Christians to pray for Israel's peace, its safety, its security. And there's often an attached promise of prosperity for those who do pray like this.
And Jerusalem here often stands for the modern state of Israel itself in this interpretation.
Often, yes. It's seen as representing the whole nation.
Got it. And the third pillar?
The third is prophecy. This view holds that Israel must exist as a nation today to fulfill biblical end times prophecies. So there's an implied Christian duty to, well, ensure Israel continues to exist as a nation.
Makes sense within that framework. And the final pillar.
The fourth pillar is people. This acknowledges God's promise to Israel as his chosen people, citing Romans 11.29, for God's gifts and his call can never be withdrawn. So the thinking goes, even if Jewish people haven't accepted Jesus, God still has a special plan for them. Therefore, Christians should also stand with Israel because God does.
Okay, so those are the four traditional pillars: promise, prayer, prophecy, people. But as you said, the narrative doesn't stop there. Our sources also explore a more nuanced perspective, one that challenges these traditional views.
Exactly. This other viewpoint really calls for more open-mindedness, a kind of rethinking of Christian allegiance. And this nuanced view becomes particularly relevant, perhaps, when we connect it to recent tragic events, like October 7th, 2023, the horrific Hamas attacks, about 1,200 Israeli deaths, 250 hostages. Terrible. But then the source highlights the Israeli response. As of the time that source was recorded, over 56,000 deaths, 132,000 injured. So this source argues that while Hamas's actions were absolutely uncalled for, Israel's response was, in their view, a disproportionate use of force.
And this nuanced view connects that back to the idea of support.
Yes. It suggests that loving and supporting a nation, any nation, doesn't mean you have to agree with everything it does. The source even points out that God in the Old Testament didn't always agree with ancient Israel. It mentions Jesus weeping over Jerusalem's sin in Luke 13. So love doesn't equal blind endorsement.
That's a powerful point.
And it draws a really critical distinction here. Unlike Old Testament commands, say, to destroy certain nations, which this source argues were direct, specific commands from God to ancient Israel as a theocracy, a state run by God's authority.
Right, not a general rule for all time.
Exactly. Modern Israel, it points out, is not a theocracy, it's a modern political state. Therefore, the argument goes, there wasn't a direct specific command from God for their response to October 7th in that same biblical sense.
Interesting distinction. What about financial support, then? The billions from the U.S.?
The nuanced view suggests, essentially, giving wisely, not blindly, knowing where the money's going, being accountable. It's a call for discernment, really.
And that idea of unequivocal allegiance we talked about.
This perspective directly challenges that. It argues the Bible doesn't command that kind of total allegiance to any earthly nation. Our primary allegiance, it says, should be to the kingdom of God. It actually encourages speaking out against injustice, citing Proverbs 31.9. And it makes the point. Being pro-Israel doesn't mean you have to be anti-Palestinian. You can care about both.
Okay, and how does this nuanced view approach prayer, that second pillar?
It broadens the meaning of peace. It's not just about military security. The Hebrew word shalom, it points out, means much more. Wholeness, healing, restoration, peace with God. So prayers for Jerusalem, in this view, should be for both Jews and Arabs to find true peace in Christ. Prayers for an end to hatred and war, for justice, for God's kingdom purposes. Kind of like how Paul prayed for Israel's salvation in Romans 10.1.
A much broader scope for prayer, then. What about prophecy, the third pillar?
Here, this view questions whether God actually needs human help to fulfill his prophecies. It suggests maybe our role is just faithfulness, trusting God to bring about his plans in his own time. Our job is obedience, not trying to engineer the future.
Interesting. And the last one, the people pillar. How is that reevaluated?
Well, it acknowledges the debt Christians have to the Jewish faith. Christianity came out of Judaism, right? But it argues this debt doesn't translate into automatically co-signing everything modern Israel does.
And here's where it gets really interesting, you said.
Yeah, because it draws a sharp distinction between what it calls biblical Israel, run by prophets under God's direct guidance, and modern Israel. Modern Israel, it argues, is run by politicians, heavily influenced by secular culture. It even cites Pew Research data showing, for instance, that a significant percentage of Jewish adults in Israel support things like same-sex marriage or abortion legalization views, perhaps not aligned with traditional biblical interpretations.
So separating the ancient theocracy from the modern secular state.
Exactly. And this distinction is further underlined by pointing to a New Testament redefinition of true Israel. Romans 9.6 says not all who are descended from Israel ethnically are truly God's people. And Galatians 3 suggests true descendants of Abraham are those who share his faith, regardless of ethnicity, Jew or Gentile.
So if true Israel is redefined in the New Testament,
then this perspective argues there's no automatic biblical command for Christians today to support the modern political state of Israel in the same way.
Okay, so bringing this nuanced view together, what's the final takeaway?
It concludes that, yes, Christians should support Israel in some ways, maybe praying for peace, loving the people, but that support doesn't automatically extend to endorsing, say, disproportionate military actions taken without a direct divine command like in the Old Testament. It emphasizes there's no specific New Testament command to support the political state of Israel. Any Old Testament principles only apply if Israel is acting according to God's kingdom principles, this view suggests.
So the bottom line for Christians from this perspective.
Value life on both sides. Show empathy for everyone grieving, love all people, and speak truth for justice without being afraid of being wrongly labeled anti-Semitic. Promote faith over allegiance to a flag.
A very different perspective indeed. Okay, let's pivot now to the unique relationship between the United States and Israel. Our sources make it clear this relationship is, well, unlike pretty much any other.
It really is, and putting it in a broader context helps understand just how unique. Israel receives, by far, the largest amount of U.S. foreign aid, despite being, what, 0.01% of the world population?
Just 0.01%, wow.
Yeah. Yep. They've received something like 30% of all U.S. foreign aid since World War II. It's about $4 billion a year currently. Totaling, adjusted for inflation, almost $300 billion since 1945.
$300 billion.
Yeah. One source even cited that amount as potentially enough to end world hunger, just to give a sense of scale.
That's staggering. And this support is largely unconditional.
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
It often passes Congress almost unanimously, even when Israel might be facing, international condemnation for certain actions.
So beyond the money, there's diplomatic cover, too.
Absolutely. Unconditional diplomatic cover is a huge part of it. There's an example from 2014 during the conflict in Gaza that year. The UN Human Rights Council had a resolution denouncing Israel's actions. Out of 38 countries on the council,
Well, let me guess, the U.S. voted against it.
the only country to vote against it. The U.S. consistently uses its veto power in the UN Security Council, votes against resolutions condemning Israel in the General Assembly, while often the rest of the world votes overwhelmingly the other way.
So the big question is why? Why does the U.S. offer this level of unprecedented support? What do the sources say?
Well, one source offers a pretty blunt geopolitical explanation. It argues the U.S. functions essentially as an empire, focused on controlling global resources, markets, trade routes.
Okay.
And the Middle East, obviously, is crucial because of oil and strategic location. In this framework, this source describes Israel as, and this is their term, America's attack dog.
Wow, America's attack dog. That's direct.
It is. The idea presented is that Israel carries out actions that align with U.S. interests, but might look too, well, imperialistic or aggressive if the U.S. did them directly.
Does the source give historical examples to back up that claim?
It does. It points to several instances. For example, the 1967 Six-Day War, officially presented by Israel as a preemptive strike for survival. But this source quotes an Israeli commander, Matthew Khaled, who apparently later described it as partly a bluff to seize Arab land. And strategically, it served to discredit socialist Arab regimes like Egypt's Nasser at a time when the U.S. was tied down in Vietnam. That's the interpretation offered.
What other examples are mentioned?
There's Israel bombing an Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981, apparently done with tacit U.S. approval, even though the U.S. was publicly backing Iraq against Iran at the time. Then the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, aimed at crushing Palestinian resistance groups, again, reportedly with U.S. support.
And it extends beyond the Middle East, too, according to the source.
Yes, it mentions Israel arming apartheid South Africa when others wouldn't, training security forces, sometimes involved in torture in Pinochet's Chile, and even training the Guatemalan army during a period recognized by many as a genocide against indigenous people.
So connecting actions across the globe back to serving U.S. interests.
That's the argument being made, yes. And more recently, in the War on Terror, Israel is described as a loyal partner, taking a hard line against Iran, routinely bombing targets in Syria.
Which brings us to that famous Joe Biden quote.
Exactly. He famously said years ago, were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region.
It really captures that sense of perceived strategic necessity, doesn't it?
It absolutely does from that geopolitical perspective.
Okay, now let's dive into the domestic side of the support in the U.S., specifically the role of lobbying. Groups like AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, we found a source featuring a pretty heated debate on exactly this.
Yeah, it was quite the exchange. So from one perspective presented in that debate, the U.S. actually gets massive benefits from the alliance with Israel. It's not just a one-way street.
Like what kind of benefits?
Intelligence sharing is highlighted. Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, is described as, quote, one of the best sources on the planet. Apparently, they share significant intelligence with the U.S. Plus, the argument goes, Israel's enemies, Iran, Hezbollah, etc., are basically the same as America's enemies. So the alliance is seen as crucial for national security.
So the cost of the aid is offset by these benefits.
That's the argument. Recreating those kinds of intelligence assets and strategic positioning independently would cost potentially tens, maybe even hundreds of billions of dollars.
Okay, but that brings up a controversial point that came up in that debate source. The idea of allies spying on each other. Does Mossad spy on the U.S., even the president?
Well, one participant in that debate tackled this head-on. They said, basically, they probably do, and we do as well.
Just admitting it.
Pretty much, asserting that friends and allies spy on each other, calling it a conservative, realistic assumption that countries act in their own self-interest, while saying they don't like it. The perspective was that it's just, well, inevitable. Part of the game with all allies.
Okay, so let's get to AIPAC itself. How is AIPAC described in this debate?
Well, one side strongly defends AIPAC, describes it as an American lobby, made up of Americans working for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, not a foreign lobby.
Emphasizing the American part.
Exactly. This view also argues AIPAC isn't actually as powerful as people think. They claim it was badly wounded by failing to stop the Obama administration's Iran nuclear deal, for example.
And the money they spend in elections.
This perspective says, yes, AIPAC's PAC raises money for candidates who are sympathetic to Israel, but these are individual American donors giving the money, not the Israeli government funneling cash. It's explicitly denied, in this view, that AIPAC coordinates with or takes direction from the Israeli government. They frame it as an independent American group.
Okay, but there was a forceful counter-argument presented in the source, right?
Oh, definitely. The counter was strong. It basically asks, well, if AIPAC is just an American lobby, why isn't it registered as a foreign agent?
Under FIFTRA, the Foreign Agent Registration Act.
Precisely. The point made is that many other American groups that lobby on behalf of foreign governments are required to register under FIFTRA. There are legal consequences if they don't.
So why the exception for AIPAC, this view asks?
Exactly. This opposing perspective insists that AIPAC's goals are, in fact, shaped by the Israeli government, that there is coordination, there is communication, and that this amounts to, quote, foreign influence over our politics. It directly challenges that claim of independence, a real point of contention.
So a stark difference in how AIPAC's role and influence are perceived. Wow. We have certainly navigated a complex landscape today. From the daily realities described for Palestinians to deep theological debates among Christians.
And shifting to the really unique geopolitical strategies surrounding the U.S. and Israel, the massive aid, the diplomatic shield.
And finally, digging into that intricate and clearly contentious world of domestic lobbying with the AIPAC debate.
Yeah, we've seen how different sources provide really distinct lenses, don't they? Ways to view support for Israel, whether it's based on interpretations of Scripture or calculations of national interest or arguments grounded in human rights. Very different starting points.
And our goal, just to reiterate, has simply been to lay out these diverse arguments, pull out the specific details and claims from our sources, really just allowing you to see the many layers and perspectives involved here.
Absolutely. Which really leaves us and leaves you with a pretty pivotal question to mull over, I think. In a world that's so interconnected, just saturated with information, how do you personally weigh all these different drivers, geopolitical alliances, moral obligations, religious beliefs, human rights concerns? How do you balance those when you're faced with these highly charged, complex international conflicts? Something to think about.